So welcome, and as we start a new Parsha this week, and it is Parshat Shoftim, we'll make the bracha, and I will put it up on the screen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Here we are. We are zipping through Deuteronomy. Always a bittersweet time of the year for me. Shoftim, Shotrim, judges and officers. Titen lecha, you shall appoint for yourselves, bechol sha'arecha, in all your gates, asher Hashem Elokecha, which the Lord your God noten lecha lishvatecha, which the Lord your God is giving to you, to your tribes. V'shaftu et ha'am, and they shall judge the people. Mishpat tzedek, a law of righteousness, or a judgment of righteousness. So many years ago, I guess at this point, I came across what you might call a Hasidic interpretation of this verse, which I have treasured, and I'm going to share with you. So it says, judges and officers you shall place for yourselves and all your gates. And the Hasidic implication of this is your gates, is based on your gates, your mouth, your nostrils, your eyes, your ears. You shall place judges and officers. And before you say something improper, maybe a falsehood, maybe something insulting, maybe something disrespectful, or you put into your mouth something that is inappropriate, you shall place those judges and officers. So smells, what you listen to, what you look at, etc. Place judges and officers. I love those kind of what you might call them Hasidic interpretations of the text.
Wonderful.
So on to the, and I believe that came from a collection that's quite delightful called Iturei Torah. And I'm trying to think of like decorations, something like that, at any rate, of the Torah. And there are many commentaries that are like that. My late father loved that collection. So, Shoftim v'Shotrim. What occurred to me when I came to this year is I'm trying to sort of get a sense of how the book, in a sort of long view of Deuteronomy, how Moses starts off his speeches with broad generalities of being loyal to God, and then starting to move into more and more specifics. And here, of course, he's talking about a very specific, that is the application of the law. So it's one thing to know the law, to be aware of the law, but it's another thing to apply the law. And of course, judges and officers are required to motivate and to make sure and to ensure that people uphold the law, and also that those judges should be capable of maintaining and being just in the way they apply the law. So Rashi's explaining, Shoftim, Dayanim, a Dayan is a judge, right? So judges, Haposkin et Hadin, they have to determine the application of the law. So how you apply the law in its various circumstances, you need people who are capable, knowledgeable, to be able to do that, experienced. Veshotrim, he explains, he's quoting the tractate Sanhedrin, page 16, Harodin et ha'am. So basically, rodeh it's a word we used regarding the Egyptian taskmasters. So we're talking about enforcing the people, achar mitzvatam, to follow their commandments, their being the judges. So it's also, so apparently the judges combine both the judicial and executive elements. Is it, well, sorry, it's not. I'm using the wrong term perhaps. Not executive, because would executive have more to do with the officers? But I'm thinking more of determining the law. Okay. Shemakin, in that they beat, the koftin, and they restrain, they tie, the makel with a baton, that's how they beat, uvertsua, and with a strap. So they probably didn't have metal handcuffs back then necessarily, although they certainly were developed early enough. But remember, they had something called the stocks, right? That they put someone who was recalcitrant into them. But the point is, so they restrain them. Ad sheyikabel, right? Because we know ain't no one gonna tell me what to do, right? So they have to be forced. Sadly, when you develop that kind of attitude, until they accept upon himself, this person accepts upon himself, et din hashofet, the judgment of the judge, or the law of the judge. So the judges are responsible both for creating the law and applying it in that regard, in judging the cases. B'chol sharecha, literally in all your gates. And Rashi simply says it means, again, based on Sanhedrin, in this case, page 16 again, b'chol ir va'ir, meaning in every city, every town, every place where people are settled. Lishvatecha, for your tribes. So he says the lishvatecha actually is musav al titen lecha shoftim v'shofrim. Okay, so that lishvatecha, really belongs right up here after titen lecha, right? So shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha lechol shvatecha, to all your tribes in all your gates. He says, so in a sense, it's out of place, but that's its meaning. So he goes on to tell you, right? Right. So it says, Titen lecha shoftim v'shotrim, titen lecha, comma. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha lishvatecha. You shall give judges and officers, place judges and officers for your tribes, b'chol sha'arecha, in all your gates, asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha. So I realize that of course begs a question which I cannot answer at this moment, which is, so why is it placed? Is it, put out, in a sense, out of its place? And the only quick answer that comes to me is that the Torah wants to really emphasize the idea that there needs to be the application of the law in every place where people are settled. And it wants to do that. And that's the most important thing, apart from the various jurisdictions of the tribes. We could call them states, right? That the various tribal states. Lishvatecha, for your tribes. Melamed, so this teaches us, shemoshivin dayanin lechol shevet v'shevet. So this is teaching you that one appoints judges, sets up judges for each and every tribe, uvachol ir va'ir, and in each and every city or town. And they did have a process, of course, of going through the various levels of courts until you could take it up to the Great Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. But essentially, they had local courts, they could have appeals, etc., etc. Consider how old this is, by the way, and how fundamental these particular principles are. V'shaftu et ha'am, etc. And they should judge the people, mishpat tzedek, right? A true judgment. So he says, Maneh dayanin mumchim, appoint judges that are experts, v'tzadikim, and who are righteous, lishpot tzedek, to make sure that they judge in a righteous way, in an upright way. And of course, upright way is a generalization. And so we want to be a little more specific. And that's exactly what happens here, right? How important it is to be clear about what you're saying and not to hide behind generalities. And so I know I probably give this example so many times, but I bristle when I hear someone say publicly or even privately, but especially publicly, they're a disaster. They're a terrible person.
And he's coming back. Here he comes. Here he comes. Yay. You're muted. You're
we were
back.
going to send you a sweater.
What?
We were going to send you a sweater.
I feel like I'm being censored.
Uh-oh.
Well, we just clapped for your return.
Well, I'm using my phone now as my
Oh.
because I was having internet issues, but there's no guarantee there. But anyway, I
Yep.
was in the middle of sharing a hobby horse of mine. I believe that's the correct term. So when you go off on something that you go off on a lot of times, but I think it's people don't get it. That it's one thing to say they're a terrible person, but then how are they a terrible person, or how are they a disaster? And it's so unfair when people use these kinds of ways to define someone that they are opposing or dislike or whatever. And, and it's always like, they always do this. And so you say, and when did they do it? And it winds up that they did it like, I don't know, once in 20 years.
And it's
Right,
usually
so-
something you do also. I mean,
I
one reason
agree.
you get so
Oh,
upset about what somebody else does is because you recognize it in yourself unconsciously.
So true, so true. I know. That was something I realized, by the way, when I was in high school, realized that that's a definitely a quality. At any rate, I want to go back. I need to go back to the share for a moment here. So what are the specifics here? So yeah, I mean, it's unhelpful, right? If you have a critique, then be specific.
No.
Be specific. Oh, really? You can't hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Well, it's yeah, it's working out right now. It was a little slow, but it's may be fine now.
All right. So we'll try this. Okay. Look at this. Although they aren't explaining necessarily, well, I guess they are. He starts off with somewhat of a generalization, but he's moving down, right? The level, or moving up the levels of specificity. Lo tatem mishpat. You shall not be biased in judgment. And what does that mean specifically?
Well, we didn't hear the word
Biased. Did you not
biased.
hear? Yes. You shall not
That
show
word.
bias in judgment.
Judgment, that's the word.
Okay, in judgment. Lo takir panim. You shall not show favoritism. Literally, it means recognizing faces. Remember the statue, this wonderful statue that represents justice? It's a woman, and she is blindfolded, right? With the scales in her one hand and her sword in the other hand. It's such an amazing representation of justice. It's got to be blind. It's got to be blind. Immediately, you show favoritism, can't be justice anymore. V'lo tikach shochad. You shall not take a bribe. Whew. Heavy stuff. Ki hashochad, because bribery, ye'aver einei chachamim. It is capable of blinding the eyes of the wise, the salef, and distorting, twisting, divrei tzadikim, the words of the righteous. This is heavy duty stuff here. Take a look at it. And Rashi, of course, is going to try and help us understand specifically what's going on here. Lo, so he says, you shall not pervert, lo tateh mishpat, you shall not pervert judgment, kemashma'o. He says, that's what it means. Don't pervert it. Lo takir panim. Do not show favoritism. Af b'sha'at hata'anot, he says, even when the pleas are being entered. right? A ta'ana could be like a complaint. So if you have two litigants that have a judgment against each other, they are bringing a suit against each other, right? Azhara ladayan, it is a warning to the judge. Shelo yehe rach lazeh, that he should be soft, literally, to this one, v'kasher lazeh, and tough to the other one, right? Got to treat them both the same way. Echad omed, examples. One stands, is told to stand. Ve'echad yoshev, and the other one is told that they can be seated. The fee, why, goes even a step further. Because when this one sees, right, when this one sees, shehadayan mechabed et chavero, that the judge is showing favor, is honoring his neighbor, literally was the person he has the suit against, mistatmin ta'anotav, it blocks up his complaints, his pleas. V'lo tikach shochad, and you shall not take a bribe. Afilu lishpot tzedek. So interesting, right? To see Frey, even to do an honest judgment, even if the judgment you make is in fact the right judgment, you don't take a bribe. Ki hashochad ya'aver, because a bribe blinds, right? And this is from Ketubot Kufay 105. Mi shekibel shochad mimenu, okay? One from whom he has received a bribe, okay? Ifshar, so if you've received a bribe from someone, ifshar, it is impossible, shelo yate et levavo etzlo, that he should not turn his heart towards him. Lehafech bischuto, to, in this case it means overturn the judgment in his favor. Human behavior. And this is such an incredible example, of what I've said when I've said that the subtext of the Torah is doing what doesn't come naturally. And this, what is being discussed here, is behavior that is almost part of human DNA. And you have to be mindful to not do it, to be conscious of when it's happening and to recognize it as something evil. And people don't consider this evil behavior, to take bribes or to show favoritism. They think it's okay, and you can see the basis on which the Torah tries to say justice, right? True justice. Divrei tzadikim, the words of the righteous. Dvarim hametzudakim, so it's supposed to be, right, words that can be justified. Mishpatei emet, judgments or ordinances of truth. Right. Something that can be justified. Let me see. I may be misinterpreting this because of the context here. It twists the words. Remember, this is what it said up here, and Rashi's explaining it here. Divrei tzadikim. Right. Okay. Right. Okay. I think I understand the point that he's saying. He's saying that if a judge takes a bribe, even if he gives a true judgment and people know that he's taken a bribe, they are going to be suspicious that he really wasn't even-handed in his application of justice. I think that's what Rashi is trying to say here, right? Even true statements, right? Because the moment that happens, people become suspect.
It's a loss of trust.
Correct. That's what I think Rashi is trying to point out here.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, and if you don't trust your courts, look what happens. I mean, the fabric of society, this is the fabric of society, and when this stuff starts to happen, the fabric of society starts to fall apart. I wish I could say we're far from that, but that seems to be what's happening. Tzedek, tzedek, this is this famous statement. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, right? You shall pursue, but it's mentioned twice. So it could mean, of course, only justice, only righteousness you shall pursue. But to pursue it, I mean, notice the verb that they're using. Why? Now look at this. It's so beautiful. My late father loved this so much. Lema'an tichya, in order that you shall live, v'yirashta et haaretz, and you shall inherit the land, asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach, which the Lord your God is giving you. Now we know there's a principle that from positive statements you infer negative statements, and from negative statements you infer positive statements. So what's the negative statement to be inferred here? That if you don't pursue justice, and if you don't uphold what is right and true, and if you choose to pervert justice, then what's going to happen? You're not going to tichya. You will not continue to live, and you will no longer be able to occupy the land. That's the negative.
How about righteous justice shall you pursue?
Right. Well, it could be.
Use it because tzedek means both.
Yes.
So
yes.
You could actually use both.
Right. So let's take a look at Rashi quickly. A little bit of time for that. So let's find it. There we go. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Right. I mean, it certainly is a statement that raises the eyebrows or raises the question as to exactly what it means. Right. So from Sifrei and Sanhedrin, halech achar, go after, follow Beit Din Yafeh, follow, literally it means a beautiful court. So it means, or maybe it means show preference for a beautiful court. And when it says beautiful, it means, one that has perhaps that reputation of being a fine house of justice, that the judges are experts, that they pursue it in that upholds all the little points that were made. Lema'an tichye v'yarashta. So in order that you shall survive, you should live and occupy. Look at this. Kidaihu. It is sufficient, right? It is enough. Manui hadayanim haksherim. That the appointment of appropriate, fit judges, lahachayot et Yisrael, to give life to Israel, ulohoshivan al admatam, and to make sure they are settled on their land. This is so interesting, right? So go ahead. It's fine.
Okay, so it says, the appointment of fitting judges is enough to keep Israel alive and settled in their land.
Yes.
But what about if Israel is not allowing the judges to be powerful, and that they're, either to render a decision, or that the decision is rendered but not followed?
Correct. I mean, again, that we can assume then that they will not be able to pursue justice, right? And that
so it's not just the appointment, it seems like it's the actual process of allowing the judging to happen.
Well, I think that's implied in the appointment, right?
Okay.
Because it isn't a true appointment if you don't give them the authority.
Okay.
So I think that's understood, that if you're gonna, it's not just simply an appointment, a verbal appointment. It's giving them all that authority, but they have to be righteous, and the responsibility, right, on the part of the judges, and to know. I think part of what's being said here is for judges to realize the heavy weight of their position, right? That in being given such authority, the fate of the people rests in their hands. And I think that's so true. I think so true because, again, it's the very heart of the fabric of the society. When that falls apart, I mean, everything falls apart. But what I was taking from this, Lauren, which I thought was interesting, is that it doesn't talk so much about sacrificing and and the various other mitzvot, but it's saying this is enough for for everything else to sort of move along in a positive way. And it's when this starts to fall apart, gone. Because there's always a chance, if one isn't sort of religious in the formal kind of sense, there's always a possibility you'll learn how to do that. But if at the very heart of it, you are a righteous person in making sure that you don't take bribes, you don't show favoritism, etc., etc. It's a great, great thing. So we're going to stop here and hope to continue tomorrow.